Good evening, Space Monkeys, and welcome to Freelancing. This is an online show that I, your humble host, BlueHighwind, puts together every so often. Weekly, semi-weekly, whenever the schedule opens up. Whenever really I find a topic I feel like talking about. There is no plot, there is no script, and there is no point. So if you're listening, that's your fault, not my fault. I didn't do it to you. You did it to yourself. So anyway, the first thing we usually do on one of these freelancing events is we go through the news of the last couple weeks. Specifically the nerdier news, because the modern news is just far, far too depressing. You don't want to hear about the wars and the awfulness and the terribleness and just everything's so horribly, horribly sad these days. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the bullshit that doesn't matter. So first of all, speaking of bullshit, Gamergate. As far as I can tell, it's pretty much over. And that's all we're going to talk about it. Gamergate, I acknowledged it. Over. Next up is Nintendo's new announcement. And this is a very unusual announcement indeed. It's the new Nintendo 3DS. We already had a 3DS. I actually have a 2DS, just to make things even more confusing. But now there's a new 3DS. This one is going to have a nubby thing on it, so it's like a second joystick. It's going to have more than 2 shoulder buttons. It's going to have 2 more shoulder buttons, and it's going to have better memory and better graphics and better everything. But it's called just the new 3DS, and if you like things big, there's the new 3DS XL. But, you know, like, what is it? Is this actually Nintendo's new handheld, or is it just a new model of the 3DS? And if it is their next new handheld, why are they calling it just the 3DS? It doesn't make too much sense to me. I mean, if you're going to make a brand new handheld console, you go and you make it separate from the console you have already. You don't just go and call it the same thing. You got to be very clear about this sort of marketing decisions, because remember the Wii U? Nobody bought the Wii U for years because nobody knew if it was a new Wii or a Wii U or whatever. Wii, whatever. Nobody knew. And that's a problem. That's a real problem. And the issue with the 3DS, what I particularly don't like about it, is that I just bought a 3DS like a year ago, and now it's already outdated, which I didn't know. That kind of annoys me. But the other thing is that it's going to come with its own library of games, which only the new 3DS can make. So far, the only announcement for the new 3DS is the remake of Xenoblade Chronicles. Well, basically a port. It's going to be on your 3DS, and it's going to look even worse than it did on the Wii, if that can be believed. So Nintendo is really making the market very muddled, and it's kind of a repeat of the disastrous late era of the Genesis. So Sega had the Sega Genesis, and it was okay, but clearly inferior to the Super Nintendo. So their way of keeping it alive was to add more and more parts to it. So there's the Sega CD and the 32X, and then they were going to make a Neptune, and then all of this made the market so confusing. So when they actually did release their new console, the Saturn, which had its own problems, is a disaster of a system, but when they actually did release the Saturn, nobody knew what this thing was. And nobody really knew where Sega was in any way, and eventually Sega blew up. They weren't in the console market anymore. They just make bad Sonic games now. So that's not what I want to see out of Nintendo, and I don't think the new 3DS is exactly the best options that they have. And hopefully it'll work. I mean, I'd like to see Nintendo succeed, but who knows. Now, one other bit of news. This is Microsoft. There's a rumor, is that Microsoft is going to buy Mojang, the makers of Minecraft, the world's most popular video game amongst people who are younger than 15. They're going to buy it for $2.5 billion. You know, Dr. Evil, $1 billion. Yeah, so a fuck ton of money they're going to buy Mojang for. And that's pretty much all I got on that. It's just a rumor right now. It'd be interesting, but I don't really know what Microsoft hopes to achieve with that other than I don't know, they can go and make Minecraft exclusive to the Windows Phone? Who knows? Now, let's get on to our subject. Our subject starts in 1957 with a book called Atlas Shrugged. It's not a little book called Atlas Shrugged, it is a gigantic book called Atlas Shrugged. Just listen. This thing is massive. It's the 8th longest book ever written in the English language, just over in length of the Christian Bible, Old and New Testaments. Now, what's been happening for the last few years is that Atlas Shrugged has had a resurgence of popularity because Ayn Rand is pretty much one of the very few conservative philosophers out there, and her objectivist theories and all that sort of stuff became really popular once Barack Obama was elected, amongst people who do not like Barack Obama. Now, to celebrate the resurgence in interest and just the glory of the conservative movement, they've been making movies out of Atlas Shrugged. And Atlas Shrugged is just such a gigantic goddamn book that they've had to go and release 3 movies. This is a whole trilogy of Atlas Shrugged. And if you have not heard of this at all, don't be surprised because all of these movies are extremely low budget and extremely, extremely cheap. It's actually one of the most bizarre and disjointed trilogies of films that I have ever seen, and something of a fascinating experiment. It's like, what if you chopped up a movie into 3 parts, then gave a third of a script to 3 directors, 3 different casts, and 3 completely different production companies, all making their part of the movie, and then trying to release it as one series, with none of those parts having any idea what the other parts are doing, and barely even attempts to go and keep the continuity running. And what you end up is just a completely bizarre franchise. And the reason why I bring this up now is because just this Friday, just yesterday, they released Atlas Shrugged Part 3, Who is John Galt? Now, I've read Atlas Shrugged, as unbelievable as that is, and it did not take me my entire life. I did it in a summer. So, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page as me, we're going to read all of Atlas Shrugged. Let me just find the first page. Yes, I'm going to read you all of this, so I sure hope you have a comfortable spot. Part 1, Non-Contradiction. Chapter 1, The Theme. Who is John Galt? The light was ebbing, and I've screwed it up already. I'm a terrible book reader. The light was ebbing, and Eddie Williers could not distinguish the bum's face. The bum had said it simply, without expression. But from the sunset far at the end of the street, yellow glints caught his eyes, and the eyes looked straight at Eddie Williers, mocking and still, as if the question had been addressed to the causeless uneasiness within him. "Why did you say that?" said Eddie Williers, his voice tense. And blah 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 blah, skipping. None of that. We don't have time for all of this. Let's blah 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 blah. The road is cleared, said Galt. We're going back to the world. He raised his hand, and over the desolate earth he traced in space the sign of the dollar. The end. So there you are. You've now read Atlas Shrugged. Congratulations. A little bit of applause for you there. Obviously, of course, that's not going to fill you in on the entire story. So your other option is to watch these 3 movies, and that's probably an even worse idea. So I'm just going to go and try to summarize the best I can this book, Ayn Rand, and Objectivism really fast. And in case you haven't noticed, this is going to turn into a rather long post. So Ayn Rand was born in Eastern Europe during a time when there was a certain thing called communism in the air. Communism being the philosophy that all human beings should come together into a single collective, and the government or the controls or the community should go and decide the best allocation of funds based upon various ideas. Ultimately, communism did not work and failed very badly for a number of reasons, one of which being that human beings are terribly selfish, and the other reason being that we're also rather stupid. So communism was terribly inefficient, ended up being terrible for everybody. Even the oligarchs lived in terrible poverty, and the entire system was abandoned very rapidly. But in 1957, communism was very popular, especially amongst Western liberals. So if you went to a college at that time, most likely your professor or one of your professors would have been a completely red communist or a socialist or a Marxist or a Maoist or whatever version they wanted to go under. Ayn Rand, growing up in Eastern Europe, wanted nothing to do with communism because she got the short end of the stick, meaning angry Russians attacked her family because she was Jewish. So she ran over to the United States and decided that she was going to create a moral argument against the idea of communism, that the very philosophical basis of collectivism in all forms is illegitimate, and she's going to explain why. She came up with a philosophy known as Objectivism. Objectivism, to put it simply, is you take the basic morality of communism and the basic morality of pretty much every moral system ever put together, and you flip it upside down. So altruism is bad, charity is bad, giving is bad, self-sacrifice is bad, poverty is bad. All those things, all of them bad. There is absolutely no way, in any way, to reconcile objectivism with Christianity. Those two things don't fit at all. But they also really don't fit with communism. If you could ever find a communist objectivist, that'd be a fascinating thing to see. What is good, however, is greed, selfishness, going and manipulating people, building and creating. It's actually not just pure selfishness and pure your own needs first. It's the idea that the human creative spirit is the ultimate good in the world. It's not altruism, it's not giving, it's not God, it's that what you create is what matters most. So, a hero in Ayn Rand's theory would be somebody like Thomas Edison or Henry Ford. These people who go and create huge inventions and huge things, make a shit ton of money, and change the entire world. They would not be somebody like St. Thomas Aquinas or Jesus or anybody who has any sort of vows of poverty or anything like that. Not that kind of stuff. They're not into that. They're not buying it. So they go and prove her grand philosophy of the world, which the implications being mostly are be as much of a dick as you want, and as long as you make a lot of money, I guess that's good. To go and prove her theory, or to write up a grand opus on her theory. She didn't just write a philosophy tract, she went and she wrote a novel, which is Atlas Shrugged, which is gigantic. Ayn Rand at this point was already pretty much a fringe but very popular novelist, or popular enough in 1950s terms that she could write whatever she wanted and nobody was going to cut her words. So she wrote a gigantic book, which will take you a very long time to get through. It took me a long time, and I read fast. So, the plot of this book is, to put it simply, that the entire world has been divided between supermen and idiots. These supermen are basically not really characters. They're Mary Sue-ish avatars of the objectivist glory. So the main character is Dagny Taggart. She doesn't really have much dimension beyond being a perfect woman, according to the Randian theory. And that's really the major problem with this book, is that everybody's either a Mary Sue or an anti-Mary Sue, being somebody who's so stupid and awful in every way that it's just as much to not believe in them as you won't believe in the Mary Sue types. So everybody, actually Dagny Taggart is on the low end of Mary Sue's. It increases, it goes upward. So in this world, all of these supermen have decided to go and follow their own plan. They're going to strike against the world that has been mooching off of them, that has been going and living off of their labor. They're just going to separate themselves entirely. And they go off to live in a commune in Colorado, completely separate from the world. No idea where they've gone. The commune in Colorado is just where it turns out they've gone, much later in the book. So while all the Fortune 500 CEOs have disappeared, the entire world collapses very fast, because the idiots are these people who go and talk about self-sacrifice, and there's a lot to get through in their psychology, but they're always talking about the good of others and everything else, but they're terribly selfish in every way. All they are basically thugs and pretentious assholes who will steal and take and ruin. And that's all they know how to do because they're idiots. They are incredibly stupid, hilariously dumb. Like, you won't believe that these people actually exist any more than you'll believe in the Mary Sues, as I said before. So, the big question of Atlas Shrugged is, in a few words, who is John Galt? Who is John Galt is an expression that people say when they've basically given up, when they have a problem that they can't figure out and are unable to solve in any way. Not really the best of arc words. It's definitely not winter is coming. It doesn't really flow off the tongue, but it's what people say, and it's unnatural. It's unnatural to hear people say it, and it doesn't really work too well in the movies. But who John Galt turns out to be is the grand orchestrator of this strike of CEOs. He's also an incredibly handsome man who Dagny Taggart falls in love with immediately. And they have fantastic sex. Meanwhile, the looters and the moochers and the parasites, they're all watery-eyed, fat, ugly people with awful names like Wesley Mooch. Names like that. Or Orrin Boyle. And they have really ugly, awful sex. Sex being a major theme of this novel, in case you're interested in that sort of thing. So, where it eventually turns into is that all of the smart people disappear and all the idiots run the country into the ground. And it ends with the entire country shutting down and everybody, I guess, dying. So, adapting this into a movie isn't going to be easy because there's a lot of things going on. There's a huge cast. There's a huge fantasy world that you have to go and put together. And there's the philosophical weights you have to throw down. You have to go and take all of Ayn Rand's didacticism and get it in there, because you have to go and explain all of Objectivism in a movie. 3 movies, but disjointed, terrible movies made on the cheap. So really the nut of the problem, you might see very fast, is the way this is made, and this was all produced by one guy, but he gave it over to 3 different directors, one being Paul Johansson, the other being John Putsch, the other one being J. James Manera, and different production companies, working, as far as I can tell, completely independent of each other, is that each one of these movies stars a different cast. So, Dagny Taggart, our heroine, who is the heiress to the Taggart Railroad fortune, and that's one thing that's unusual about these books right off the bat, is that railroads are the central industry in a book written in 1957 when that was already an anachronism by 20 years. And a million times an anachronism in 2014, let alone the fantasy date of when these movies take place, 2016. I don't think railroads are going to be coming back. But anyway, the nut of the problem, again, Dagny Taggart, she's played by 3 different actresses. And the first one, it's Taylor Schilling. Next one is Samantha Mathis. Then it's Laura Regan. These 2 women look nothing alike. They don't play anything alike. At least they're all blonde. They're different ages. They're different temperaments. They give entirely different interpretations on the character, and they're directed completely differently. You won't buy these 3 women in any way being the same character. And Dagny's first boyfriend, Henry Reardon, this isolationist tycoon who invents this magic glowing metal called Reardon metal, which is the world's most perfect steel, completely indestructible in every way. It's fantastic. It's wonderful. Fall in love with it. Reardon metal. Get yours today for the low, low price of $19.99. He's first played by Grant Bowler, then Jason Beeg, and then finally Rob Murrow. James Taggart, Dagny's asshole brother, this pathetic fool of a man who is basically the arch looter. He's this whiny, pathetic fool who just kind of like leans against his sister constantly. He's the real president of Taggart International, but he doesn't really have any responsibility other than hanging out with Washington types and making really bad decisions, and then trying pathetically to explain why those decisions are good to his sister. He's first played by Henry Marsden, then Patrick Fabian, and then finally Greg Germain. So that's really the issue here. One thing you might have noticed is none of these people are names you'll recognize. In fact, Greg Germain might be the one you might recognize, because he's at least been in movies, unlike pretty much everyone else here. there's no name cast anywhere, and that's acceptable. You can go and make a movie with relative unknowns. That's fine. You can get TV actors and like theater actors and that sort of thing. You can make a really good story. But if you're going to make a series, how the hell is it going to work if your cast changes every single time? And it gets worse, because not only is the cast changing, the casting is changing. There's no physical identity. There's no personality identity. Everything's shifting around. So take Eddie Williers. He's one of the more likable characters in this book. He was the guy you saw on the first page. He's Dagny's loyal buddy. He's just this everyman who happens to be the second in command to Dagny Taggart. He has a crush on her. Never gets any, though. She never gives him the time of day. Friend-zoned like no business. Eddie Williers is lovable. He's probably my favorite character. He's just a guy who wants to do his job well, and he believes in the railroad, and he believes in Dagny, and she abandons the fuck out of him to go and have great sex with John Galt while he dies in the middle of the desert at the end. Lovely story. Ayn Rand is just a woman just full of love. I love this book. I love it. Ugh. Anyway, the point I was going to make is that, first of all, he's played by a man called Eddie Gathegi, who is a relatively short African-American actor. He's got short black hair, got kind of a low voice. He was, you may know him, actually the only way I've ever recognized him is that he was on a season of House. He was on House Season 4 as one of the apprentices. I think he was the Mormon guy. Anyway, next movie is played by Richard T. Jones, who is 2 feet taller, 100 pounds heavier, and 20 years older. And is this booming, huge man, still black, whatever. But these two characters don't fit at all. And then finally he's played by Dominic Daniel, who is less of a physical break, but still huge, different, playing a different character, not at all the same. And take Francisco de Anconia, another major character in this book. He is Dagny Taggart's first boyfriend, but he dumps her for the strike. She doesn't know that at the time. He's kind of this copper playboy. One thing you might notice is that every industry in this book, it's all physical industries. Ayn Rand, there's not much in terms of intellectual industries. There's a book written in the time when America actually made stuff. We were an industrial nation, not a post-industrial nation. That's not translated at all in these movies. They don't think that far. But Francisco de Anconia, he's supposed to be the same age as Dagny, which is fine. His first actor, Ju Garcia, is. They're roughly the same age. Esai Morales, though, he's middle-aged. And Joaquin Antonio Portugal Baptista de Almeida, his last actor, he's got 40 years on the actress playing Dagny Taggart in the third movie, Laura Regan. These two are supposed to be boyfriend and girlfriend at one time? That's just creepy. Like, he looks old enough to be her dad or maybe even her grandpa. Not to say anything bad about Joaquin Antonio Portugal Baptista de Almeida. He's a very good actor. He was in Patriot Games, I think. And he was also in, he was the bad guy in Desperado. So far, he's the most famous person here. But you can see the problem when the casting is just so all over the place. This is the time in Hollywood, recently, we've made franchises much more secure. There've actually been elements of consistency and themes and the same cast every single movie. Take The Hobbits, take The Lord of the Rings, take even the Batman movies. You know, the switch from Katie Holmes to, what was her name? The switch from Katie Holmes and Maggie Gyllenhaal between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight is more unusual than usual these days. You can generally keep a consistent cast for the most part. And then you have these movies which are just all over the place. And it gets worse. It does, because not only are the casts different, the way these movies are directed is completely different. The art style is different. Part 1 basically takes place in the modern day. There's no attempts to go and make anything sort of fantastic or, you know, create any sort of interesting imagery or even try to, like, make any sort of difference or even establish place. Pretty much the whole movie is shot in a couple of boardrooms and an office. It's a very flat, just boring, just carelessly made movie. It's terrible. But you can see that's one way of doing it. Then part 2 tries this sort of attempt at sci-fi. So there'll be like folding desks with screens coming out of it and big view screens from Star Trek and like lights and shiny stuff, and the trains have turned into future trains when before they were just plain old regular trains. And that's one way of doing it, but it's completely different. This movie's shot completely differently. The director has a crane, and he likes to use it. There's actually like swooping crane shots. God bless him. Part 2 is actually not that bad. Then part 3 is shot in the opposite way. This one seems to actually be trying to take place in kind of 1957. There's still like smartphones and stuff, but you'll notice that all the trucks are really old looking. There's an ancient looking prop plane that John Galt flies with like rivets in it. And there's TVs with dials on them. Remember, don't change your dial. This TV has a dial on it. Like, nobody was talking with each other. There was no plan. There's just nothing. This is one of the worst franchises I've ever seen. And that's not even getting into the problems with production, which is budget. All right, budget is one thing. You can make a movie relatively cheaply, but then it's okay if it doesn't show up cheaply. This one shows up cheaply. The budgets for these movies divide by 2 every single time. So the first one had $20 million, next one had $10 million, last one has $5 million. And oddly enough, the second one is far better looking than the other two. I don't know how that's possible. I don't know where the $20 million went into part 1, but definitely did not go into the directing or the filming. So the special effects are terrible. There's a lot of really ugly CG. It's Asylum level. And the Asylum, I kind of respect what they do on some level. I don't believe in them as a filmmaking company. They're terrible. But they at least try their best with what they have. And it's kind of respectable, at least, because they're making shitty, awful movies about giant crocodiles and sharktopusses and sharknadoes. It's crap and it's crap. But this is trying to go and make a huge political statement. It's trying to be a book that has ideas and plans and, ways of living. And, this book deserves more than what it's getting, is what I'm saying. But you'll see shots that will make your heart go cold. You'll see filmmaking that will freak you the fuck out. In the second movie, Henry Reardon's room appears to be a hotel room. He lives in a hotel. It's obviously a hotel. There's the stupid evacuation notice on the door. Then there's, in part 3, a moment when there's supposed to be a union meeting. These factory guys are going to have a meeting, and it's shot in a multi-purpose room of an elementary school. It's obviously a gym with fold-out, bleachers. They're not even, trying to hide this. There's a moment in part 2 when Henry Reardon's supposed to be on trial, and it's just a college classroom, a large college classroom, but that's not a courtroom, and you're not fooling me in any way. There's special effects shots that are just unbelievably bad. There's one moment when they're looking over their new future bridge that they built out of the magic Reardon metal, and it's kind of a shot, it's a composite shot, so you can see the actors and the special effects that have been made, but the actors are completely out of perspective and scale. So they look like they're maybe 100 feet tall as compared to this bridge. It's just completely warped. There's CG shots, there's one moment where I think a guy was walking in front of a CG train. They couldn't even get, a train. It's clearly fake. There's shots reused in the third movie. At one point, John Galt is telling Dagny how he fell in love with her because he saw her in a nightgown on the track. So then, much later in the movie, she shows up on a nightgown on the train tracks, and it's the same shot that we saw before. They just used it again. Unbelievable. So, it's offensive in terms of watching a movie, and it's just offensive in terms of its directing. Everything about these movies are pretty bad. It's going over. I kind of went through why part 1 sucks. It's just completely flatly made, and nothing happens in it, because the way they divided the book up, they actually followed the divisions that Ayn Rand put in herself. So the book is part 1, part 2, part 3. But those aren't actual, like, divisions of a story. Those weren't supposed to be parts so much. They were just chapters. But they've decided that that's where the movie's going to begin and end. So part one, nothing happens. The whole goddamn movie is just Dagny trying to build a train line to Colorado at Rearden Metal. So that's it. That's your excitement right there. Are they going to finish the train line? And the antagonism is just people telling them that Rearden Metal is bad, and Henry Rearden's bitchy wife going and complaining at him, and James Taggart being a douchebag. James Taggart, actually, if I'm going to interrupt, that's another weird division in these movies. His character changes completely between the two. They take three completely different interpretations. First actor, I think I went through who these guys are, but the first actor, Henry Marston, he's kind of this quiet, snake in the grass sort of guy, you know, like, he's just kind of this douchey official, like, he's always you've seen him in probably television or something, where he's just kind of this evil, quiet person who's going to stab you in the back at any moment. Then Patrick Fabian is this big, loud, booming, phony jock asshole. Like, he's playing to the crowd, he's throwing money at the 5 or 6 extras they managed to get for that one shot. And he's just completely full of shit, but he's loud and he's bolsterous. He's a completely different character. Then Greg Germain, he's neither of those two things. His James Taggart is this weak, mopey kind of just follower who's desperate for approval and just always falling into hysterics, which actually makes him probably the best James Taggart, and Greg Germain's interpretation on the character is the best acting in the whole movie. In all three movies, I guess I should say. But anyway, getting back to the plot, as much of it as there is, there's so little happens. There's even like a romance between Dagny and Henry, which is somewhat illicit because Henry is married to a bitch who doesn't love him and tells him that all the time, but he's still married, so in 1957 that meant a lot. In 2014 or even 2011 when this movie came out, not so much. But the romance is done with nothing. The characters are stiff and robotic, which partially Ayn Rand to be blamed, but it's terrible directing, just terrible everything. There's no flow, there's no climax, there's no plot. Nothing happens for 90 minutes, and then they finish the railroad. Ta-da! Wonderful, I guess. So, another major change they did, because they're assuming that if you've seen this movie, you've read the book, which I guess is true in my part, but may not be true for everyone else, is that John Galt's role as leading this strike, that's actually the grand mystery of the books. They don't really keep that a mystery so much. They just go out and have him show up in silhouette as this figure who's just going to go and ramble off some objectivist crap. Would you like to go to a world where the sweat of your brow is consistent? No gods, no kings, only man. I chose rapture. I rejected those answers. You know, he'll just go off and give his Andrew Ryan speech, and people will follow him. And you immediately know who this person is. In the books, the John Galt figure was actually the villain, as far as Dagny could tell. She called him the Destroyer, and she wanted him dead. But they don't keep that up. They don't keep that mystery, because why have tension or anything interesting? Why make a movie why make a movie that'll keep people awake when you can make a movie where people will fall asleep? You know. Anyway, part 2, I'm just going to go and do a brief plot summary. This is where things actually seem to happen. So, the government has gone mad, and they elect this guy, Wesley Mooch, who, in the first movie, was actually played by Mayor Ebert from Godzilla 1998. Yes, the guy who played Mayor Ebert. I don't know his name. Part 2, all of a sudden, he becomes this, actually, looks like the Raging Cajun James Carville with a tightly groomed goatee. Really ugly man. But they have him now playing Wesley Mooch, who's, of course, playing a different Wesley Mooch altogether. He goes and puts together this directive that nobody can change anything in economics at all. So a business cannot produce more than it's already producing. It cannot produce less than it's already producing. It cannot hire an employee. It cannot fire an employee. It cannot pay an employee less. It cannot do anything. Nobody's allowed to do anything economically in any way. This is their solution for the recession. Just stopping everything. It's so dumb. And actually in the book, one character even points out, wait, if we're in a recession, how is freezing everything going to get us out of the recession? And the guy's like, don't be so theoretical. Ayn Rand, she's not a bad writer. That's what I'm trying to say. She can be funny at times, and she can put good characterization together every so often. Not in these movies, unfortunately. So, in this one, the heroes are finally being challenged somewhat, because the government wants Henry Reardon's medal, and they're going to stop at nothing to go and steal it from him. And he won't just give it to them, and they don't want to just take it, and it gets confusing. Doesn't really matter, and again, unfortunately, not really that much happens. This could have been one movie. I don't know why they decided to divide it into 3. But, there's, as I said before, this is much better directed, so you get a much larger sense of place. They have way more extras this time, and they actually try to go and give a larger sense of the world is starting to fall apart. In the first one, every so often they would drive past one street corner, and there'd be a few extras there going and, like, asking for jobs, or there'd be a broken-looking car on the corner. It's always the same corner. In this one, they at least have scenes of Dagny walking through the crowd, and you can kind of see the desperation on everyone's faces. But it's still not enough. I mean, I think the guy who did part 2 is probably the best director. Let me check his name. It's John Putsch. It's probably the one guy who actually cared about filmmaking. Paul Johansson didn't give 2 fucks, as far as I can tell. He seriously just doesn't look like he cares. But plot-wise, a few things do happen. James Taggart gets married. He gets married to a nice little dime store broad called Cheryl Brooks. It's supposed to be this Cinderella story. And much to my disappointment, because I always thought in the books, I decided this on my own, that Cheryl Brooks would have this really hardcore New York accent, kind of like Harley Quinn. Oh, Mr. Taggart! Oh, thank you so much for marrying me. Such a nice guy. Oh. And she doesn't. They don't do that. Nobody really has an accent in these movies. Or if you do have an accent, it's completely inconsistent. So one guy, Dr. Stadler, starts out with an Eastern European accent. Then he turns into Dr. Crusher in the second movie from Star Trek Voyager, so he has an American accent. Then the last one, he's suddenly played by a British guy. This thing just pisses me off, but I'm off topic. James marries her as kind of a public relations stunt, and then the movie forgets all about her, which is a major shame, because Cheryl Brooks in the novels, she's also completely forgotten, so that's one thing they didn't fix, but she's one of 2, like, relatable people who are real people. There's her and there's Eddie Williers, and they're both kind of wasted. Eddie is even used less in this, because at least in the books, he got to talk. He would have his own point of view chapters where he would just kind of tell you what's going on the ground, how the employees of Taggart are dealing with what's going on and all that sort of stuff. He was talking to some anonymous person who eventually turned out to be John Galt. But that's what made Eddie great. It was just kind of, you got to feel what the real people were dealing with, while everything else in these book and these movies takes place with Ivory. Everyone's rich. It's all rich people or politicians. It's impossible for you to actually buy that sort of stuff, and you need those things in order for your movie to work. And they don't. Eddie is just a dutiful employee the entire time. And Cheryl disappears entirely. She'll have 2 scenes in the third movie, played by a different actress, of course. And I'll get to that when I get to that. But Henry Reardon, he winds up going on trial for violations of the communism, and because the idiots are so stupid, they can't even properly punish him. They just kind of let him go. There's one awesome moment where Francisco de Anconia gives a great speech talking about why money is good, why finances and capitalism are good. Yeah, this is actually one of the better speeches in this book. I'd call it probably the best objectivist essay you're going to come across. Everyone in these books talks in essays. They don't really talk in dialogue. They give huge Shakespearean soliloquies, massive text, huge paragraphs that just beat you over the head. This is one of his better moments, and it's spoiled because the actor they have playing him is completely wrong for the part and doesn't do it right. But what does eventually happen is that Dagny and Henry find this magic engine, which is a perpetual motion device which will power the entire West Coast if they can get it working. So Dagny goes and gives it to Dietrich Bader. That guy's in this movie. He's probably the most famous actor in all three of these films, as bad as that sounds. She gives it to him, and he's supposed to go and finish the engine, because the man who built it has disappeared. Turns out he's John Galt. Spoilers! Anyway, Dietrich Bader is working on this all movie, and Dagny really has nothing to do with this entire film. She's secondary to Henry Reardon, who's kind of the main character this time. Dietrich Bader, he finally finishes it, but then John Galt scoops him up, and Dagny decides that she's going to go chase after him to find out what's really going on. And meanwhile, the entire country's falling apart, and Henry Reardon's looking for a divorce, and they cut out one of my favorite scenes, which is James Taggart is sent by the government collective of stupids to go and hurt Henry Reardon and his sister. So his idea of hurting them is to go and bone Henry Reardon's wife, Lillian. And Lillian, of course, all she wants to do is hurt her husband, so they're both down for this. So they have really gross, awful sex, where at the end of it, while James is climaxing, he goes and calls her Mrs. Reardon. He can't even look at her as a friend or an ally or even a sexually desirable person, as much as a possession of Henry Reardon that he gets to spoil. And, again, this is where I have to go and give kudos to Ayn Rand. That's fine by me. But they don't have it in the movie. It's gone. Anyway, what happens when Dagny's chasing after this character in this huge CG plane chase, which is probably the most visually impressive thing in the whole trilogy, she goes and she flies through a mountainside, which turns out to be nothing more than a fabrication. It's a fake mountain, which leads her to paradise, to Galt's Gulch. And that's where the movie ends. 2 more points I have written down in my notes is that, first of all, the president in this movie is played by Ray Weiss, who you might know as the guy who played the president in Command & Conquer Red Alert 2. So this is a distant sequel to Red Alert 2 as far as I'm concerned. It's probably more in canon than Red Alert 3. And $800 for 20 gallons of gas. It's a fun joke there. But actually, going back to Ray Weiss, I thought originally when Part 1 said that it was set in 2016 that it was kind of a take that to Barack Obama. Because this is the threat. In 2016, this is what Barack Obama is going to do to the country. Goes back to Dinesh D'Souza's propaganda film, 2016, Obama's America. If you don't elect one of our pasty, white, terrible Republican candidates in 2012, look what he's going to do to the country. He's going to turn it into an Atlas Shrugged nightmare. And now the president is played by Ray Weiss. And it's clearly a fantasy world. Like, it has nothing to do with modern America in any way. There's no appreciation. There's no translation of the story to try to fit into modern times. It can't possibly be a get that at Democrats, because the guy they have as a president isn't a Democrat. And then, weirdly, just when you think that this doesn't have anything to do with the real world, Sean Hannity shows up in a cameo. Sean Hannity on the Fox News set is going and discussing one of the stupid new legislations. It's like it's supposed to be the real life Sean Hannity being Sean Hannity, doing his job. Which, I mean, Sean Hannity, I guess on one hand, must feel just completely happy as a clam to go and be in these movies. Yes, look at my conservative credentials. I'm in an Ayn Rand film. Are you? Twirling the mustache he grew just to twirl it. However, if Sean Hannity is in this movie, and he's not in Galt's Gulch, he's not in John Galt's paradise, that means that John Galt just let him the fucking die. John Galt did not want Sean Hannity in his paradise. He has no room for Fox News pundits. Even he has no room for Sean Hannity. So, applauds to John Galt, not so many applauds to Sean Hannity, who really should have thought this one out more. And actually, Sean Hannity shows up in the third movie. He is the one human being who stays for 2 movies. He is the core human being. He's the one consistent thing in this franchise. That's your center. It's Sean Hannity, who gives yet another cameo. And joining him for television cameos are Glenn Beck and Ron Paul. So if you want to see a movie starring Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, and Ron Paul, by all means. Glenn Beck, who actually, when he shows up, he has gained a hell of a lot of weight since Fox News fired him. And actually, I rather liked Glenn Beck's cameo because he seemed rather apologetic. He's like, this is how you do it, folks. This is how you tell the country what to do. You don't rant and scream and yell. You just explain it simply like John Galt did. And it's kind of like Glenn Beck just begging people to care about him again. And I'm sorry, Glenn Beck, it's over. You had your shot. It was fun while it lasted, but we're done with you. So, now to part 3. And this is subtitled, Who is John Galt, as if that matters, but part 3 is so fucking bad. I mean, I went and I saw this in an AMC theater, because they were the only ones playing it, as far as I could tell, in the entire state. But, what AMC does is they have really, really comfy chairs, like these lovely leather chairs, which you can fold all the way back. So, I very nearly fell asleep. I hate AMC's really comfy chairs, because I don't want to fall asleep. I gotta watch the movie. I got an audience to report back to. I got a job to do here. And you're taking me away on a cloud, and I can't be on a cloud. I gotta go and shove the bamboo under my fingernails and watch this fucking awful movie. It's so... Part 3 is as bad as a movie as you could possibly imagine. Part 1 was just lazy. Part 2 was trying its best, but still failing. Part 3 is an utter disaster, and I think this is the one that was directed the most by a true blue Ayn Randian objectivist guy, because he completely buys into this stuff, and every line in this movie where the other ones tried to stray away from the overt politicism of Ayn Rand's dialogue, this one, every fucking line is objectivist bullshit. Every goddamn line is the politics and the crap, and there's just no personality. There's nothing you could sink yourself into. There's nothing to it. And it's so lazy, this movie, too. Because instead of trying to establish place or give any sort of personality to the world, and you know, this is exciting stuff you're doing. This is dark and disturbing and depressing. It's the world coming apart. And there have been great movies that have done this sort of stuff. Fantastic movies. Go and watch Children of Men. Like, directed by the same guy who did Gravity. Children of Men shows the world coming apart. Beautifully, wonderfully shot. Everything is so imaginative. And part 3 didn't fucking try. Worthless. Completely worthless. The way they establish the world coming apart is they have an omniscient narrator just tell you what's happening, and sometimes even tells you what characters are thinking. It's like in Dune, the 1985 Dune, directed by David Lynch, where at one point it just looked like they ran out of money, so they just kind of cut a half hour of the film, and they just had a narrator tell you things. Paul and his girlfriend's love grew. That was one line, and I could not believe that. I'm like, you cut out the romance? You just have a narrator tell me that these two characters fell in love? I'm sorry, I don't remember who Paul's girlfriend is in those movies, in Dune. I should remember, but I really don't. Tell me of your homeworld, Usul. That's all I got. I don't remember who she is. But the fact there's an omniscient narrator just telling you things, it's so lazy. I hate, this is a kind of a broad generalization, but I hate narration in movies. Unless it's kind of like Edward Norton in Fight Club, that kind of like twisted, disjointed narration, or like you're actually getting inside the mind of the character, not him telling you what the plot is. Narration that just tells you what the plot is so lazy. It's show, don't tell. Not tell, don't show. And I know you didn't have any budget at all, but maybe you shouldn't have made a movie on $5 million if you needed much more than that. So, where was I in the plot? Ah, yeah, Dagny lands in Galt's Gulch, this Colorado commune which all of the rich people have set up. And it is disgusting. This is where the first, 40 minutes of this movie takes place. And it's disgusting to read. It's worse to watch. So, how do I describe it? Alright, it's a utopia, okay? So, utopias are indescribable. It's like trying to describe heaven. All right, you have heaven. You can't actually describe what it is, what it's like, what people live like there, because a perfect world doesn't exist, and a human being is going to reject any kind of false perfection that's thrown upon you. If you just try to tell me that whatever you're showing me is absolutely perfect, and everyone here lives perfect lives, and everyone's perfectly happy doing what they do, I go and I put up my middle finger and I say, fuck you, this doesn't exist, nothing like this is ever going to happen. I don't believe it. Some people may, if you believe in objectivism and you believe in Ayn Rand so much that you can just kind of overwhelm your brain's natural circuits to reject this sort of thing, but you don't do it. Every single society has its problems, every single person has its problems, and this is one thing that the book fails at, because it's trying to go and show both the worst of people and the worst of societies, and also the best, and there's the ultimate extremes, and it can't seem to find the middle ground, because it's not really a story for story's sake. It's trying to go and tell a grand political theory and philosophical theory. And it really doesn't translate well onto the screen, because the director, whose name is J. James Manera, his way, his paradise, is this kind of pseudo-cowboy, western-y town in, for whatever reason, the California Redwoods. Like, this isn't Colorado, it's clearly California, but whatever. So everyone lives in these kind of cowboyish places. Dagny wakes up in a bed, and the bed's got like fake log patterning, and there's like kind of Mexican Indian kind of triangular designs, and they go past a building which unironically calls itself the General Store with like a saloon sign on the front of it. It's like, I don't believe this at all. I really can't buy this. And of course John Galt's actually there, and here, John Galt in the book is probably as bad of a character as has ever been written. Just ever, because he's the ultimate of Mary Sue. He's the living embodiment. He's the savior. He's right-wing Jesus. You know, he's everything you could possibly want. So he has no character. He has no faults. He has no theories. He has no beliefs. He has nothing except being this perfect figure, which apparently looks exactly like Robert Redford, because that's how she describes him. Sandy hair is the one physical description he's ever given. And he's also big and handsome and burly, and Ayn Rand is masturbating while she's writing about this guy. And oh, so gross. I really don't want to think about Ayn Rand getting, like, Ayn Rand, I don't want to think about her having sex or anything like that. It's like if your first grade teacher got wet. It's like, oh, ew, no, I don't want that. It's like your mom having sexual thoughts, like, ugh, gross, or your grandma. So we're in this magical fairyland, and Dagny is being told all of their theories and everything that's perfect and everything's lovely and wonderful, and I could just spit right now at the camera. It's as unlikable as filmmaking as I've ever seen, and it's just not even that well shot. They even like reuse, I mentioned before they reuse shots, but there's one moment where John Galt is driving Dagny someplace, and they use the very same shot of her looking up, smiling vaguely. That's what her actress does in every single shot here. She's smiling vaguely. Look how vaguely happy I am. And everyone walks around, they're all vaguely happy. And it's like, what am I, in a Visine commercial? Am I going to see a woman rollerblading with a poodle? Two old people in bathtubs watching the sunset? Like, this should be some pharmaceutical shit. It's bad. It's really bad. Luckily, they leave. Finally. Dagny goes and refuses the whole plan of the strike and everything like that, so that she can go and try to save her country. And she fails almost immediately. And John Galt chases after her because he's in love with her, but they don't say it yet, so whatever. Luckily, the sexual hypotenuse in this story, the third leg here, Henry Reardon, he thankfully decides not to show up at all in this film. He flies overhead at one point, and they say, hey, look, it's Henry Reardon. The narrator, while talking, shows Henry Reardon in one scene, and that's it. He's not in the rest of the movie. He's gone. He's not there. Where'd this guy go? He has no place at all in the plot, when he's been probably the second most important character so far. As insane as that is, and he's just gone. What happened? Where are you, my man? So Dagny tries to go and save the country, and oh shit! I was realizing in part 2 I have to dial back a while, but it's not really important to anything I've described so far. One of the major signs that the country is starting to fall apart is a huge train crash that just caused because every single employee of the Taggart Railroad at this point have become idiots, so they won't take responsibility for anything. So when there is a problem, they're just like, ask the next guy. Not my problem. Get someone else make the decision. So the train breaks down in Colorado someplace, and it has to go through a tunnel. And there's this really hard smoking, cigar smoking politician guy who calls up James Taggart's like, "You get me to my campaign stop in California or it's your ass. It's your ass, Taggart. Get me across." And so they go and they send in a steam train, like an old coal-firing smoke thing through a very tight cave. And you can see the problem almost immediately. It gets worse because on the other end, they go and they throw down a government shipment of munitions and fuel. So these two trains collide into each other because nobody can say no to the government anymore, and the government's run by fools. So there's this huge explosion, the cave goes down, everybody dies on the train. Now, kind of a major tragedy, but this leads me to one of the reasons why I hate Atlas Shrugged as much as I do as a book. Ayn Rand goes and writes the most disgusting passage ever written, possibly in any book. She goes through why each and every single one of the 300 people who were on both trains who died horribly in this explosion all deserved it. Not just the assholes who refused to do their jobs, not just the politician who was trying to grease everything up. No, everybody. The boy who just hands out drinks, he was guilty too. The children who were sleeping in their beds when they died horribly, they were guilty too. Everybody. One guy was a playwright who went and wrote plays that he thought didn't need plots. The guy went and wrote Waiting for Godot, and he deserves to die, apparently. Fuck off, Ayn Rand. You write shitty fucking books, and you are a bitch and a half. It's awful. As terrible as anything I've ever read. And, of course, everybody in the country deserves what comes, because they're all idiots. Everybody except for Ayn Rand's select few, they all get taken away. They all get raptured to their magical fairyland where they get to have sex wonderfully, and everyone else, we all get to die. There you are. You all get to die. I think the interpretation of this novel that many conservative people get, because they're not very well self-aware, is that I'm a genius. John Galt's gonna go and save me. In fact, let me go and start the revolution myself, because look how much better I am than everyone else. No. The interpretation I get is that they're just gonna leave me behind. Because there's no way they'd take me along. There's no way they'd take you along. None of us are special enough. Nobody is a perfect Mary Sue figure that John Galt wants. There is no John Galt. It's all fantasy. It's not gonna happen. You're fucked. So, you better start trying to save the world that you have right now instead of disappearing, because otherwise you're gonna end up like the people here. So, getting back to part 3, that was a brief takeaway. The movies themselves don't actually go through why every single person on the train deserves to die, and thank God for that. So what's happening in the real world right now is, remember Cheryl Brooks, James Taggart's wife from the second movie, who showed up for one scene and then was completely forgotten about? She's back. The narrator first tells us how she's feeling about things, which is she doesn't like her husband anymore. That's what the narrator says. Then, next shot, there's a newspaper clipping saying, Cheryl Brooks Taggart dies. Doesn't tell you how she dies. I think she commits suicide in the books, but the movies don't tell you. So the next two scenes are just two characters thinking of her. First, James thinking of her while he was being a complete pathetic asshole, and then Dagny thinking about her when she talked, when Cheryl apologized to her. And that's it. That's all we get out of this character. This completely wasted and underused character in the book, not in any way fixed by these movies, because they don't care about her. They don't care about anything, really. I suspect this entire thing is just some kind of massive fraud. Who knows? So, in terms of what's going on, the world falls apart even more. The president tries to go make a speech. He's no longer the president from Red Alert 2. He's now a completely different actor. Then John Galt hijacks it. Now, John Galt goes and gives his grand speech. In the book, it is 10,000 pages long. Who fucking knows? It's really long, and it's almost unreadable. Thank God the movie itself has it down to like 5 minutes. He just goes and gives the short version. And even then, it's really long. So, basically, it's one static shot of John Galt in the shadows. You can see his eyes, but not his mouth, going and talking to everybody in the country. And it's like, if you remember the Les Miserables movie from 2012, was it? Yeah, it was 2012, where you might remember the actress and the actors just going and singing in front of the camera, and the camera not moving in any way. They would just sing, and it was one shot. And you just see the actors just spitting into the camera lens, and nothing happens. No cuts, no changes in perspective, the camera doesn't pan, completely static. That's what we're kind of looking at here. Occasionally you get reaction shots of other people, but that's it. You just look at this guy talk to you for 5 minutes. And it's not that bad, but it's still really boring. So, at this point, everyone decides, we want Galt! We want Galt! So the crowds start rioting and are angry. So for the next like 20 minutes of the movie, while continuing to keep with the same theme, the same blocking theme of just people sitting in offices going and talking about their evil plans, you'll hear in the background an unseen angry mob yelling repetitively, we want Galt! We want Galt! And they'll have like whole scenes of characters talking, boring exposition scenes, and then in the background you just hear, we want Galt! We want Galt! And that's all you hear. That's what you did? That's so lazy. It's terrible. But there you are. If you want to see a movie where you'll be distracted by the scene you're going to see by a crowd going and saying, we want Galt! There you are. It's John Galt's Atlas Shrugged Part 3. Have fun with that. So the stupids decide that the only person that can possibly save them now is John Galt. So they kidnap him and they beg him to be their leader. Please, you want regulations gone? We'll do it. We'll do whatever you want. Just get us out of this shit. And John Galt says, no, fuck all you people. I don't care. And so they decide that they're going to torture John Galt to go and get him to lead them. And this is in the novels too. They're that pathetic that they're trying to torture him over and over again. And they can't do it. He's not cracking. And in the books, as I recall, they try to use this thing called Project F, which is like the ultimate torture device, but it doesn't work. And John Galt like immediately he fixes it for them so that they can torture him. In the movie, they actually torture him most of the way, and then it breaks. And then Jim Taggart goes crazy and tries to kill him with the machine, even though it's not working. And they kind of cut out the moment where James Taggart goes completely insane. But Dagny and friends, they go down and they rescue John Galt, and they fly away on a helicopter, and New York falls apart and everyone dies, except for the good people. So that's where the movie ends. It's there. Also at one point earlier, John Galt and Dagny Taggart, they had sex in the back room of some office somewhere in the train tracks. Fantastic for them. But as for the rest of the world, we all die. But one positive change, or one ridiculous change, is that the very last shot of this movie is this cheesy fucking shot where the camera pans away from New York going black, and you see the Statue of Liberty. She turns to you, or the helicopter turns to you. It's a CG Statue of Liberty. She doesn't look any real as she did in Dinesh D'Souza's What Would the World Be Like Without America. But her lights don't stay off. It's a Statue of Liberty triumphantly there, still standing as a beacon of freedom. America. America lives on. God bless it. And I'm saluting for that. So, that's the moment that's supposed to end when Ayn Rand didn't give two fucks about America. She doesn't care about America. She doesn't care really about the Constitution either. What she cares about is the human mind and traditions and objectivism and innovation, no matter what the cost. Actually, this movie, Part 3, gives actually what's one of subtly, you may not, if you think about it, you'll realize why this is such a bad idea, this end of all regulation and government and none of that. There's a moment when Dagny has just survived her plane crash, which in part 2 she crashes into an empty field. Part 3 she crashes into a forest because nobody saw the movie beforehand. Anyway, she this doctor comes up and he goes and he uses his magic iPhone to go and check her vitals and everything. It's very Star Trek-y. And that's the second time that's the third time I mentioned Star Trek in this review. Huh. Anyway, he goes through and he's like, you look fine. Yeah, I invented this thing because there's no government regulation. And do you really want that? Do you really want no regulation on the medicines you're taking or the food you're eating? Are you fine with the EPA not existing? So doctors can just go and try you with whatever quackery they think works best. No oversight of any kind. Who knows if the shit he could be shooting gamma rays into her skull right now, giving her permanent brain damage, popping tumors, building tumors in every muscle fiber he scans. But hey, the government wasn't there. Who needs a government when you have philosophy and dreams and a gigantic novel and 3 awful, awful movies? So, who are these movies made for? I guess is kind of the point. I don't know. I really don't, because if you're really into Ayn Rand and Objectivism, you're going to read the book, or you're going to just go and talk on your little forums, and you won't actually watch this. You're not. These are bad movies. Even if you love the subject matter, you got to admit, these are terrible movies. And 2014 has just been full of these really right-wing, just awful films. If they actually made a good one, I'd be all for it. Like, if they made a good version of Atlas Shrugged, get Terry Gilliam on the case. He'd make a great version of Atlas Shrugged. I'd be great for it. You could definitely make a 2-hour, really solid novel out of this. If you could, there's good characterization. There's actually frightening consequences. The idea of the whole country just coming to a halt and everyone dying thanks to economic stagnation, that's a terrifying concept. Again, watch Brazil. Brazil's great. You'll see that kind of thing come to life. Just the insanity of regulations and bureaucracy. That's a movie that shows it. It's not here, because these movies are made on the cheap. And the funniest thing about them is that they're all about the free market and what individual imagination can do and what unlimited from regulations and everything, when they are the worst victims of the free market, because the major Hollywood money didn't go behind here. Nobody was going to invest hundreds of $millions in this stupid fucking project made by amateurs who had no idea what they were doing. They were going to go make a superhero movie. And that's what people want to watch. They want to watch a superhero movie. That's what the public's talked about. Supply and demand. The trade was there. So maybe there are all these huge Atlas Shrugged fans waiting for their one shining movie, and for whatever reason they got the times wrong for the movie and they didn't see part 1 and 2, and part 3 will rocket to massive success and win every Academy Award, but it won't. It's just not going to. This is one of the worst trilogies I've ever seen. It's so cheap. And cheap is a bad word, ultimately. For movies, it is. And just ugly direction, ugly forms, ugly scripting, just terrible fucking screenwriting. There's nothing really to recommend about any of these. I guess if there's one thing that these movies do right that the novels don't, it's that at the end of part 3, instead of leaving poor Eddie Williers to die in the middle of the desert, abandoned by all of his friends, fighting for an ideal that Dagny already gave up and she didn't bother telling him about, because who fucking cares about Eddie? They actually mention while they're leaving on their helicopters that they're going back for Eddie. So there you are. That's what you did for us, Atlas Shrugged film trilogy. You went back for Eddie. And I guess in that one freaky way, you're better than the novels. if there's anything I could sum this up with, it's that. It's shit. Don't watch them. And I hope I entertained you going into describing these horrible movies. It's not very good novel in this weird kind of world that we've gone into. We've definitely gone deep into the bizarro land here with these Atlas Shrugged films. And, it's taken a while to go and parse out all the bits. Sorry if this wounds up. This is going to run like an hour long. I'm sorry about that. But I hope you enjoyed it, because this has been an exchange. Ayn Rand would tell you, I'm not just giving you this stuff, because in Objectivism, you always have to go and give really, really tortured, awful explanations as to why you give anybody anything. Like, Henry Reardon will take Dagny on a date and be like, I'm not buying you dinner just to buy you dinner. I'm buying dinner so you'll have sex with me. He'll just say that out loud. I didn't buy you that dress because I like you. I bought it because I wanted to see what you looked like, and that gets me off. His horrible, unromantic language. And we're going to use that now. So I'm not giving you this blog post and this podcast here. This is an exchange. I'm giving you entertainment in exchange for your audience-ness. And everybody gets something out of it. So I profit, you profit, and Objectivism wins. Rand Paul 2016. God bless America.